I quote, growth of around 4% or so will bring down unemployment. It is also quite achievable. And also to his statement, and I quote, I've said on a number of occasions, if we can't make 4% growth a year, the whole lot of us ought to give it away. And finally, I refer him to the remarks of his good mate, the never in the Senate, Senator Richardson, who said 3 days ago, and I quote, well, anyone who made a prediction of 4% growth in the immediate future would, I think, be joking, end of quote. So I asked the Prime Minister, is the Prime Minister joking when he predicts 4%, or is he going to give the game away? And isn't it a fact that things are far worse than even you ever believed they'd be?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker.
Order.
Mr Speaker. It's taken the Deputy Leader a while to get to his feet. And the Treasurer's right. I think they've had to reprogram him over there from the things that he normally says. And I must say, I don't get bilious too often, Mr Speaker, but when I saw him on the television saying the other day he had to take money off the wealthy to give it to the poor, it was nearly too much for me. It was nearly too much. I just made it. Just held it together. The fact is, you see, Fight Back was right. You see, he used to go to the doorstep, Mr Speaker, and when a journalist dare say, but Mr Reith,
Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Reith, what about this? He'd say, it's in Fight Back, go and read it. It's all there. It's all been done. We put the research in, the time, it's all been costed, it's there. Every I dotted, every T crossed, go and read it. Different tune today. Not so cocky today. Not so cocky today. Mr Speaker, it's very interesting, isn't it? It's very interesting, isn't it, when the Coalition's talking about growth, when the Leader of the Opposition was putting out press statements as late ago as the 24th of November saying Fight Back is the best stimulus. The government is running a ridiculous argument that Fight Back would not stimulate the economy. It seems the government is right. And that now what they've got to do is embrace the government's policy and try and stimulate the economy. He said, Fight Back is not contractionary. It's not contractionary. Only want to cut $7 billion out of spending, not contractionary. Will release resources for the use of the private sector. And it goes on. Mr Keating's policy of fiscal stimulus has become increasingly reckless. And now the Deputy Leader's complaining about the growth rate. The jobs he intends to buy today with taxpayers' money are nothing more than a cruel hoax on the growing rank of the unemployed, and he knows it. That was in the 24th of November. But of course, as we had, as I said, the beachside conversion. And now we're into stimulatory policy, so what they're saying, they're now pretending that they can deliver a bit of the government's agenda. A positive stimulus, a bigger role for government, caring for people and higher growth. Well, I repeat what I said earlier, Mr Speaker. If that's what the nation needs, let the party that believes in these policies deliver them. And that, of course, is the government. Now, Mr Speaker, I have said, and I'll say it again, that Australia must be able to sustain 4% at least growth rates into the future. Must be able to sustain them. Because if we cannot sustain them, unemployment in this country will not fall over the long term. And it's a matter of shame for the Coalition that after 30 years of almost continuous office, that the greatest growth that Australia could have in the 1980s was the best they could do with the capital stock after 30 years of being around, is Australia could grow only at 4% without the demand spilling into imports. And what we saw in 1988-89 and 99-90 is with 9% growth in demand, only 4 to 4.5 being settled by domestic production. In other words, while all the economies to our near north were doing 6s and 7s and 8s, the best we could do after you turkeys being around for 30 years was 4 to 4.5%. Now, Mr Speaker, what I'm saying is simply this, that the notion that we should ask the central bank to sit on the economy with removing the employment objective from its policy and to depress the economy with the same stupid willfulness that the Leader of the Opposition has talked of in the past, so that we're sitting on 2% growth rates where we're not seeing a rapid decline in unemployment, that is an unacceptable policy. That is an unacceptable policy.
The member for Dundas,
in this country, the central bank has a commitment to full employment and to price stability. And the government has a similar commitment to full employment and to price stability. And the only way we'll get it is not by employing the Reserve Bank to put a flamethrower on the economy, as you wish to do, with it supposedly being independent from the legislature and the community, but by putting the capital stock into place to grow the economy at 4% plus. Now, Mr Speaker, the Liberals over there, the Leader of the Opposition wants to indicate that he doesn't seem to know the difference between the growth rate now and the sustainable growth objectives over the long term. The growth rate now at the moment is about 2%.
The Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
It happens to be the fastest rate of growth of any OECD country. But it is not enough. But it is not enough. And in the future we will have to grow at around 4%. And our contention is the only way you can grow around 4% without the growth spilling into inflation is not with a draconian monetary policy, but with an incomes policy. And guess who's the only party in this parliament with an incomes policy? Us, the government. In other words, Mr Speaker, the only model which exists in Australian public policy for a growth policy which will let the economy grow but not see the growth frittered away in a price and wage round with higher inflation is an incomes policy under the government's policy. And we're the only party with a policy structure to handle 4% growth rates or better. That's the point I'm making. But 4% we must do over the medium to long term. But we've got to get back there. And we're getting back there now with a 2% growth rate. And Mr Speaker, as I indicated to the House a week ago, the Economist magazine has Australia at the top of the poll of forecasters for growth through 1992 of 2.1% for Australia, 1.5 for Belgium, 1.3 for Canada, 1.8 for France, 1.1 for Germany, 1.4 for Holland, 1.2 for Italy, 1.8 for Japan, 1.5 for Spain, minus 1.3 for Sweden, 0.2 for Switzerland, minus 0.9 for the UK and 1.7 for the USA. And in the following year they have Australia at the top again for 1993. So, Mr Speaker, the government's policy is inducing a recovery, but only the government's policy can induce a growth rate of the 4% area and keep it with low inflation without the central bank needing to burn the economy with the flamethrower of a brutal monetary policy a la the Houston prescription. And that's why the 4% rankles you, because you know you couldn't get near it. But Mr Speaker, let's not have the duplicity and the deceit and the confusion which the Leader of the Opposition is seeking to imply in the question. The fact is, Mr Speaker, 4% is a medium to long-term growth rate which Australia should have. The current growth rate is what we've got, which is the fastest in the OECD. But, Mr Speaker, I suppose we should say imitation is the greatest form of flattery. Imitation is the greatest form of flattery, and you're now coming to tell us that you didn't really believe it when you said fight back was the best stimulus. You didn't really believe it when the Leader of the Opposition said the government's running a ridiculous argument about fight back not stimulating the economy, and you didn't really believe it when you thought that the government's policy had become increasingly reckless. Well, I suppose it's better you recanted, even if it's late. But let's not pretend that you can deliver parts of the government's policies better than the party that believes and has constructed those policies in the first place. Mr Speaker, the only party that can deliver stimulatory policies to this economy and not blow the inflation rate is the Australian Labor Party, and I'm afraid that's it for the opposition.